Good evening. Welcome to the Spiritual But Not Religious Show. I'm your host, George Lewis. Gosh, I'm looking forward to my guest tonight. He's a really interesting guy. He lives in New Zealand, and he's coming live tonight from New Zealand here in little old Sarasota, Florida. We're going to have a great time with Terry Keillor. I'll give you some more information on him shortly. But I want to talk a bit about a couple of things. One, the Spiritual Broadcasting Network and what we're doing and why we're doing it. You know, the New Age, the metaphysical, the New Thought, whatever name you want to call it, is a very diverse group of people with diverse belief systems. And as such, we really don't have a voice. The spiritual but not religious community has grown leaps and bounds in the last 20, 25 years. People are finding that they're not connecting the way they want to connect with a higher power in their churches, and so they've left kind of in droves, really, and right now the government, U.S. government census says that 20% of the United States population, more than 20%, actually call themselves spiritual but not religious. And the thing there is there are many diverse ways to be spiritual but not religious. And because they don't really congregate anywhere, there's no church, so there's no central place where everybody gets together, there's really no voice. And so the Spiritual Broadcasting Network is about bringing you those many diverse voices of spiritual but not religious. I want to talk with you about another issue that's dear to my heart, and I've worked at other than just transformation, the idea of world peace. Now, there's a real, when you say world peace, there's a real issue with the whole concept of world peace, in that I think what happens is that people get this idea of heaven, if you will, or floating around on clouds, or everything is perfect and it's utopia, and so they tend to turn away from that. I don't see it as being utopian. When you think about stories and storytelling, a story without conflict is no story. It's just not interesting at all. So we need conflict really to grow in our own spiritual life, to be able to enjoy our life. Believe it or not, I know you may think you have way too much conflict in your life, and that may be true. But without conflict, it wouldn't take long. We'd be pretty doggone bored. So I'm quite sure that there will be a transformation. I think it's probably already in place at this point, and we will have peace in the world. But what will happen is we'll still have conflicts, but we will learn how to resolve and work with our conflicts differently, without having to go to war, without having to murder one another to come to those kinds of resolutions. If we don't, we're doomed, as humanity is definitely doomed without some kind of intervention, something stepping in here. Overpopulations, water is going to be a problem. Fuel certainly is a huge problem, totally controls our whole world and our whole being. And greed sits on the top of all of this. And power and big money sits on the top of all of this. It's headed for a disaster. We're a train wreck running down the tracks 200 miles an hour. So something has to happen. Hopefully it won't be the kind of disaster that folks want as far as, the end of the world, the apocalypse, and, a few being pulled up and saved and the rest of the world being destroyed. I don't think that's what we're looking forward to at all. And I want you to think about one thing when you think about whether this whole concept is possible. If you're a history buff or you know much about history at all, you know that we had the Dark Ages, and we went from the Dark Ages, which was, they were whacking each other around with clubs. It was a tough time. It was very difficult. We went from that to the Renaissance, where people were really trying to, the kings, the people with money were trying to make it better for the people, and there was this huge transformation. But there's no specific point that anybody can point to and say, here's when it happened and here's why it happened. It just happened. And I think our transformation is going to be very much a similar kind of thing. So that's the end of my rant for tonight. I want to tell you a little bit about my guest, Terry Keillor. Terry is author of Conversations with Armises, an extraterrestrial guide, and a second book, Apocalypse or Eden, It's Your Choice. We're going to talk about both of those. Terry, as I said earlier, lives in New Zealand. Fortunately, it's about noon or 12:30 his time in New Zealand. Our last guest from Australia was up at 4 in the morning, I think, wasn't he, Tom?
Yep.
So let's welcome Terry to the show. We got Terry on, right? Terry, hello there.
Yep. Yeah, how you doing there, George?
I'm doing great. Glad to have you on the show. Listen, your house looks really interesting there in New Zealand. That's quite a. Is that your den that you're in, your work area?
No, this is a dining area, actually. I had to look hard for a Canadian chalet in Tauranga. There are not a lot of them around, so.
You'd almost have to build your own, right?
Just about, yeah.
So
I've done that.
So you were from Vancouver, huh?
I was originally from Vancouver, yeah, and I met my wife getting off the plane in Vancouver from New Zealand. So, so I'm what they call a war bride in reverse.
A war bride in reverse. A war bride with a gray beard. That's interesting there. Quite an image. How long have you been? So you've been there quite a while then.
Yeah, I arrived in New Zealand in 1973.
How is New Zealand affected at this point by all this gasoline stuff and all the banking systems crashing? What kind of effects is that having on your world?
Well, as you can understand, Australia has probably weathered the storm as well as any other country in the world because they supply all the materials to minerals and mineral materials to China.
Right.
And Australia is one of New Zealand's biggest customers. And also New Zealand's predominant exports are in the area of agriculture. And so commodity prices have been pretty good. So New Zealand's come through it pretty well. Our unemployment is running at about little over 6%. And also because the mortgage structure in New Zealand is such that if your house is worth less than the mortgage, you don't stop paying it because you're personally liable for any shortfall the bank might have. So it's not like you can just throw your keys back in and walk away from it. So consequently, even though we've had some devaluation in houses, about 15%, people just tough it out really. So as long as you got a job, you're okay. There have been more foreclosures, but nothing like the scale of North America, nor was the lending criteria ever, as easy in New Zealand. So. Well,
it wasn't easy here. It was loose. It was actually criminal, really, when it was going on. Well, you talk about a 15% drop. Gosh, some of our people are as much as 50, 60% of their value just gone.
And that's tragic, And what's even more so is that the consolidation of wealth and power, has been sort of exacerbated at the same time, hasn't it? Really.
Well, the stock market here has had some of its best years ever, while the rest of us are dying on the vine.
Sure. Yeah. And the bailout's all been for the banks. It hasn't been for the. I mean, you have an interesting thing where you have a federal exchange that's privately owned.
That is one of the biggest scams going right there. The Federal Reserve.
Yeah. Owned by the same banks. That they're the ones that all got the 0% interest money given to them.
Right.
What a great scheme. You own a bank, you give yourself money at 0% interest, and then you loan it to everybody else, including the country, and make a profit.
Well, not only do you give it to yourself, first you print it. I mean,
Yeah,
it's air.
yeah. There's no shortage of it. You just keep printing
Yeah,
it.
just keep printing. It's air basically. It's it's pretty crazy. That's for sure. I don't think it's at all close to what our founding fathers had in mind. That's for sure. So
Well, and
let's kind of get off that a little bit, and we'll come back to it, Terry. But I want to, I'd like to get some of your background. What brought you into where you've written two very powerful books? You're living. It looks to me like you're living kind of for a lot of writers a dream life in New Zealand. You're not suffering from any real cold weather there, I don't think.
no, New Zealand's got a pretty temperate climate. So
Right.
latitude-wise, it's similar to California. A little bit cooler because it's in the southern hemisphere. We haven't got, such large. It's an island, so we're more modulated by the sea and stuff. So
Right. So how did you?
temperature-wise, I have a big avocado tree in my yard here that feeds me about 600 or 700 avocados a year.
Oh wow.
So, and I can grow, most a lot of food in my own yard just to supply our needs. So, climate-wise, it's really a bit of a garden Eden in New Zealand. But
Well, you must not be eating all that many of those 600 or 700 avocados. You look pretty trim.
we give a lot away, George.
Yeah, I'll bet you do. I'll bet you do. So, give us your background. Where in Vancouver? You must have been born about what, 44 or something like that in the early 40s.
Just between, I guess, Germany capitulating and Japan getting its dosing of radioactivity.
Well,
So
I was born in 43, so we're right there in the same era.
yeah, we're all the baby boomers, aren't we? So I started out as a professional engineer, working in Canada, and I've worked in the IT industry for over 40 years, at all levels, senior management and consulting, and
You got a lot
really,
of hair. You have a lot of hair left for a guy that worked that long in the IT industry.
It's not what you do; it's how you feel about it, or how you look at life, and what you get dealt in life. So
Absolutely.
yeah. So, and anyway, somewhere along the way, I was building a house with a friend, and he was a carpenter, and he was helping me build it, or I was helping him build it, and had a little bit of a disagreement on how the house should go together. There were some problems in some of the framing that was delivered, and anyway, I took my attention off the job and fell off the house and spent about 5 or 6 weeks recuperating.
Oh boy.
A couple of crushed ribs and stuff, and at that time he loaned me one of his books, and like a lot of carpenters, I think right from the time of Jesus, I think they've all had this sort of bent towards religion. But anyway, he wasn't religious as such. He would be very much along the lines of spiritual but not religious.
Uh-huh.
And anyway, and this was a book by Edgar Casey, and I started reading that, and because he'd been talking about it a lot, and I thought, oh well, I might as well read it.
Was that The Sleeping Prophet?
Yeah, that was. It was a book, about his life. It's called There Is a River.
Right,
so
right.
Yeah, and so I thought, well, geez, they certainly in university. I think the definition of university is you learn more and more about less and less until you know everything about nothing. So,
well, you get paid for all that, though.
Well, yeah. I guess that's true if you get in the right area. So,
right.
And IT was a reasonable area to make a living. But that started me on my journey of reading sort of alternative information and stuff. But I very much had the engineer's analytical approach to everything I read. So, there's nothing really that I talk about that I haven't done a lot of research and thought it through.
So you have a real left brain analytics working along with your right brain, and gives you a kind of an interesting perspective, doesn't it?
Yeah, and it a lot of people that come to this are probably quite intuitive and psychic people, or very much right-brained people.
Right.
And it's hard for them to get an audience with, left-brained people. They think, oh yeah, what are your qualifications? How qualified are you to speak about these things?
Absolutely.
And they could say, well, I actually experienced these things, and that doesn't wear it with a person that can't experience them. And that's the problem, is we're trying to discuss things that are non-material, and if you aren't open to those realms and open to those sensory areas, till we have instrumentation that actually measures these things, we don't tend to believe in it.
So you believe that we will actually have instrumentation that can measure this?
I think the time will come, that we will have ways of measuring. Certainly there have been scientists and doctors and everything like that have been able to measure very subtle energies and subtle bodies,
Right.
the aura and some of the techniques the Russians came up with.
Something like the Keillorian photography, that kind of thing is what you're talking about.
Yeah, and that's the interesting thing is the Russians certainly are leading the world in terms of their investigations of energies related to pyramids and Keillorian photography and all that sort of thing. So.
Well, it was the Russians, I think, that really got us into remote viewing, wasn't it? We had to, get our own remote viewing thing because the Russians were far advanced in that whole idea. I'm not sure where they're at with it these days.
Yeah, well, I guess they're maybe that. Yeah, I don't know. Most of that stuff goes into sort of a black hole, doesn't it? You don't really know who's doing what. So
all of it goes to a black hole.
Yeah.
Yeah, it all goes to a black hole. Leaves us with speculation.
Yeah, and it's when you're outside of America and looking in, it's very easy to say look what's happening there, and all these conspiracy theories flying around the place.
Right.
But if you're actually in America and you're part of it, and you're part of the culture there, then Americans have always been incredibly patriotic people. And I've had a lot to do. My father became an American citizen, so some Canadians get a bit funny about Americans because they're a bit like, there's always that small guy mentality. Somebody said being a Canadian next to America is like a flea in bed with an elephant. That it doesn't really want to squash you, but it doesn't really even know you're there, and if it rolls over in bed, you're finished. So
not intentional, but it works anyhow, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
So Canadians have always probably had this sort of big brother, sort of little guy, little brother attitude, and the love-hate relationship. They love to go down and experience the warm weather, and American people are just incredibly hospitable people. But they've often been very inward focused, so their knowledge of other cultures and knowledge of
You mean you actually think we're self-centered?
Oh yeah, I mean we all are.
So.
Yeah.
That may be our biggest failing, is our self-centeredness, and it causes huge amounts of trouble throughout the world.
Yeah, but at the same time, there's a very strong core of spirituality and family, family centeredness, and there's a huge amount of goodwill.
Yes.
And America always led the edge. I mean, if you look at California. California, everything that was going to happen in the world always happened in California 10 years before everywhere else. So,
right.
And even in terms of collapse of the economy and stuff, it's leading the world. And you might say, well, that's not really where you want to lead the world, but often, to actually replace one order, you need to collapse the old order, and and I think America is going through some very difficult birth pangs of a new order.
I think you're right. So I think it's essential. It certainly happened that way in my own personal life, and I get an idea that was so with you too. Am I right? You had kind of a spiritual experience, Terry, that took you in a whole new direction, did you not?
Yeah, well, really, as I was relating to earlier, that about the accident that kind of forced me to, to start reading some of the materials, and that kind of led me to read more and more, and you find that the right book falls, sort of off the shelf into your lap. Once you start looking for alternatives, you'll find that, once the student's ready, the teacher will present itself, and that may be in the form of a book or a speaker or, somebody you meet. It may be, often our teachers are the ones that we find that are the hardest, we don't think of them as teachers, but they can actually, through your experience of dealing with them, they can be the best teachers you'll ever have.
Some of my best teachers have been some of the people that I just disliked the most.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I had the hardest time with, for sure. I don't necessarily invite those. I don't volunteer up for that. But
no.
I'm open to it when it does happen.
Well, I work with a lot of people that come to me, and I deal with a lot of the goats of the world, So now, there are people that take the sheep track. In New Zealand we got a lot of sheep, so you tend to use these analogies. But a sheep track kind of winds its way gently up the hill, and but a goat tries to go straight up the ridge.
Going to butt his way through, right?
And of course it's a bit more dangerous, and they might fall down, but it's quicker, if they can keep going. But it's more dangerous. So a lot of the people come to me that might be people that have had problems with drugs or have, been born into very dysfunctional families, maybe spent their whole early childhood in foster homes, and, even had abusive, relationships of all types. But if they actually, what precept I finally came to was that everything that happens to you is something you have chosen to happen to you for the lessons that you can develop from that. So now if you can actually look at life that way, it is very empowering, because you can't blame anybody else for your circumstances. You can say at one level, I've chosen to go through this. So and that gets you around this thing that's saying, oh, God, I've had such a terrible life, or I've had this circumstance or that, and that's why I'm doing this. And if you had, if you had to live in my shoes, and that sort of thing, you realize that, hey, I must have been a very courageous person to choose to go through some of these circumstances to see whether, in fact, I had the stamina to get through. And so, that
new viewpoint changes everything too, doesn't it, Terry?
Well, it does. Yeah. It's the ultimate in empowering people, is when they take full responsibility for everything in their life.
Do you earn a living as a mentor or a coach, or is this something you do as service work?
Well, I do some workshops and stuff like that. I probably spend about half my time doing my hypnotherapy with clients and doing workshops.
Right.
I'm still teaching in business and IT part-time.
Oh, are you? Okay.
Yeah. So you find in a place like New Zealand, and also I'm a type of person that I don't really like to charge outrageous prices for the work I do. So to me, it's about making it accessible to the people that need it, and often they aren't the people that have all the money. So
right.
So I found that you have to really, if I want to reach the people I reach, it's not going to be hugely rewarding financially. So I've consequently had to keep working and doing more conventional.
Well, it's interesting. You take people who are of this kind of a mindset. That's so often the case. Money is, it's a priority, but it really isn't the number one priority, is it?
No, and and the sad thing is everybody thinks, that people that talk about these things are making money at it, and really what they're doing is just trying to speak their truth and work at a level where they can, be honest with themselves, with others, and help other people.
Well, there's kind of a backlash, really, in some circles, that if you're making money from spiritual kinds of endeavors, but it really makes sense to, to bring those two areas of your life together.
Well, that's right. If you make your money, if you can make sufficient funds through your spiritual work, then it gives you more time to actually devote to that endeavor.
Absolutely.
So, yeah. And to me, we should be restructuring our society so that everybody works in the area that they can be most effective and happiest. And if we did that, well, we'd have a pretty happy world, wouldn't we?
Well, the problem with that, though, is it's kind of like trying to herd cats. Everybody's headed in 17 different directions. I'm not sure how we'd ever... I think it'd probably have to be taught in schools, right, in order to even begin to get people to understand that possibility.
Yeah. Well, again, you're not trying to herd people. What you really want people to do is to actually help them connect to the... Because I believe everybody has an inner plan. So a lot of the work I do with my hypnotherapy is allowing people to connect with their... I have a model of your conscious mind and your subconscious mind and your superconscious or soul mind, you might say. And some people call it the higher self. And so when you look at a particular person living through a particular lifetime with a particular personality, that gets kind of influenced by all these factors. But if people can connect to that higher self, then they'll connect better to what their life plan is all about.
Oh, without question. Isn't the real issue here, though, the starting point, the challenge, problem, whatever you want to call it, is that most people are on autopilot and they're not awake, and the issue is awakening people. I mean, you go back to Gurudev and many other places, and that's what they're talking about. Like awakening.
Yeah.
You're obviously awake. Like me, it sounds like it took a 2x4 across the forehead in the form of an accident to get you really thinking differently, though.
Yeah.
Maybe that's what's going on in the world with all the pain and suffering that's there now.
Well, yeah, if we look at our own life, we find that it's the hard times that where we really grow. And, if it doesn't kill us, it cures us, So, and that's, we had issues, with a large earthquake in Christchurch not long ago. And, there's still a lot of people that aren't in their homes or haven't found replacement homes, and and the rest of the country's had to sort of chip in terms of, and you've had similar disasters with New Orleans and other places like that. And what they found is that, a lot of the mental illness issues that they had in that area have really dropped down because people have actually got something external to worry about. And they've also,
interesting.
And they've also created a much closer sense of community because they've all been through this trauma and trial together. And it's only when you're faced with, a large adversity like that you have to work in together to get through it.
Listen, for our viewers who aren't familiar with New Zealand, Christchurch is a city and not a church. So we're really talking about a city that, exactly. So let's
in fact, the issue, the church, there is a large cathedral right in the center of it, and so that I guess probably had a lot to do with it. And the naming of it, about 300,000 people there, just a bit more. But they, and in fact, the cathedral got very badly damaged, and the Anglican Church, who are the owners of it, decided that they would let it be demolished completely. And then, but a lot of the people that aren't part of the Anglican faith, the city, members of the city that really identify with this are really upset about this. They want that thing replaced or rebuilt.
Well, it's a landmark, right? It's
landmark. But I guess at one level it means it's more than just a landmark. Churches and they always were. Cathedrals are always the thing in the center of a town in the medieval days. And it's kind of raised your vision to something higher and more grandiose than the individual, you know.
So I'm going to kind of turn the conversation here a bit to as a matter of fact, conversations with Armises and the extraterrestrial guide. You talk about a program of genetic manipulation of human DNA towards ever greater consciousness. Tell us about that. What do you mean by that?
Well,
how's that happening?
I mean, there's a lot of speakers and people that talk about the development of human consciousness, and there's quite a few talking about, you know, we recognize we have two strands of DNA, and they talk about there being other levels, other strands of DNA that will be activated, which will raise our consciousness. I mean, if you think of some psychic people that can sense and communicate, you know, with both other realms of energy or spiritual level, and also are much more perceptive of people with ESP and stuff. There are a lot of information, or a lot of historic records that point to a time when mankind had that ability,
right,
and perhaps misused it. And certainly the majority of people don't have a very, you know, advanced sense of psychic awareness. But for us to really advance as human beings, you know, this is a planet of emotions, so we do, and psychic energy really uses emotional energies as its kind of basis.
It's a conduit, isn't it?
Yeah. And that's why so many women, you know, I've been involved with different kinds of spiritualist churches and stuff, and when I do workshops and whatever about connecting with your inner self and spiritual guides and that sort of thing, you find that 80% or more of the people that come along are women, because women are much more, because of their polarity, are much more focused on using emotional energies and have that innate ability to be, you know, psychically perceptive,
right,
than men. Our religions have been very much male-dominated, so they've very much repressed that. You know, I mean, the Inquisition was really first founded to sort of stop a movement in southern France called the Cathars, who believed in reincarnation and healing and stuff.
We just lost the video. Tom's going to try and get that reconnected while we talk.
Okay.
You know, one of the things that's pretty interesting, you talk about a secret development of reverse engineered ET technology on human agencies.
Yeah. So, well, a lot of this, you know, a lot of the stuff that there is, you know, if you read Whitley Strieber's books, and one of his books called Majestic, you know, a lot of it all
Tom's
goes
going
right
to bring
back.
up my picture here shortly. Sorry about that. We're having technical difficulties, and I think we hit one of the New Zealand blocks down there. We're going to blame it on you, you know.
I'll cut the call and I'll recall you guys, I think.
Oh, okay, that'd be great. Well, while
he's going to call us.
You know, it looks like we're still having a problem, but anyway, we'll carry on, George.
we can do just quite fine with the audio if that's where we need to be.
That might be now.
We're not hearing anything on this end, so you know the thing about video is if the video is bad, then people aren't going to stay. But if the audio is good, we got you back. How about that? Good job, Tom, and good job. Good job on your end. You know, in our early days of broadcasting, that would have been cause for us to shut the whole show down. You remember that, Tom? We just everything would be done. We've had to put our ego in our back pocket an awful lot of times and just keep moving forward. So
it's wonderful technology when it works.
When it works,
I've got a daughter in Melbourne, one in Qatar, and and one in Vancouver, and one in Auckland. So we use Skype an awful lot.
Oh my goodness, they're all over the world, aren't they?
The world, yeah. So without Skype, we'd never get to see our grandchildren.
Well, I'm the same. I'm about 1,300 miles away from my grandchildren, and Skype it's a wonderful thing, you know. So,
Okay.
Jumping back to where we were.
Okay, you were asking about reversed engineered technologies and that sort of thing. Well, you know, I'm not an expert on those at all, although I have read and seen a lot of YouTube stuff, and I guess the thing is there's quite a large majority of Americans that think that the UFOs exist.
Absolutely,
and,
without question.
And if you think about the billions of stars we have just in our own galaxy, you realize that, and they're now finally starting to measure the influence of the planets on those stars by the light fluctuations. So they're starting to finally say, yeah, there are definitely planets out around these stars, and some of them seem to be about the same size as Earth and stuff. Well, surprise, surprise. But I mean, for us to think that we're the most advanced civilization in the galaxy, let alone the universe, is so ludicrous and homeocentric.
You mean we're going to have to drop our arrogance and think, take a look around us?
Yeah, I mean, my God, we're not. It wasn't long ago, you know. I mean, you think of the practices we do. It wasn't long ago that we were fighting wars with technologically advanced civilizations that were gassing people,
right?
Just because they didn't like their race, you know. So we're at baby stages, really, and I think is it Michio Kaku, the physicist from New York? Yes. There, we're a level 0 or something like that compared to knowledge of and advancement of our civilization. But the fact is that we can perceive these things, and what we can think of surely exists. And at least we got to the point now where we're actually thinking about what might be happening. So we're also aware that we're going through quite dramatic changes climatically and environmentally. And if you follow some of the work of David Wilcox, he goes into a lot of research about what's happening, and you find that it's not only the planet Earth that's going through these changes, but the whole solar system is going through these changes. So everything is heating up in our solar system. So we're part of a bigger cycle, and it's not just the impact man's having on it. It's a much bigger thing. And there's a lot of evidence to show that we've been through prior cataclysms, and I touch on that particularly with some of the Hopi, revelations and prophecies about 4 world civilizations. And if you think of how quickly we've advanced in the last 200 to 300 years technologically, from the wheel and buggy to advanced spaceships, or reasonably advanced spaceships, you realize that we couldn't have developed that quickly from such a low technological status unless, in some ways, we're just rediscovering what we've already done before. And if you look at the whole picture, you realize that, hey, we are nowhere near are we at the top of the tree when it comes to advancement of a civilization.
So do you believe that there's an extraterrestrial influence that's has taught us this? Is that what you're saying?
Well, it could be two things. One, if we've done it before, and
right,
all the evidence points to us,
such as Atlantis or that kind of thing, Lemuria, that.
Casey brought up many, many, many stories about people. They said this trend came from when you were at this time in Atlantis, and I've done many people under regression, and they'll go back to earlier times and influences. Well,
right.
Most of my regression is focused around touching on prior influences that have carried forward into this life. I don't usually have to go that far back. It might be only one or two lifetimes, but
Right.
But people come up with coherent stories that are pertinent to them, and when they do actually touch on this information, it changes their life and it improves it, and issues they've had resolved. So the proof is kind of in the pudding. Now, there's just so much evidence to support, prior civilizations that had reached advanced stages, and that have been destroyed in cataclysms.
And there's a good chance they're far below the sea and covered with, silt and dirt and everything else, and some kind of cataclysm turned everything upside down.
Sure, and we've got mammoths that are frozen in the ice with grass in their tummy,
Right.
Something very quickly. So they didn't, you don't get frozen to death with grass in your stomach overnight, and then, so there's a huge amount of evidence to support that. So first of all, it's obvious that there are more advanced civilizations out there.
Yes.
Why would they want to have an interest in us? They probably wouldn't want to have a tremendous interest in us unless, one, we're part of a bigger experiment, or that we are reaching a point where we're going to actually create havoc with the rest of the, with other planets or other parts of the galaxy.
Which of those do you tend to lead towards yourself? Both?
Well, I think they're probably both true.
Yeah.
And so I think, and certainly Armistice and many others have talked about humankind being a genetic mix of many different ET races, and that we're kind of a unique experiment. We have one thing that, if you think of people being connected psychically, that limits your free will, because if you knew what everybody was thinking and feeling, then it's going to really moderate the way you behave, one way or the other. You can't fool anybody. How can you be a criminal if everybody knows what you're thinking? So,
well, I think that's exactly the case. I think that we all could read each other's minds, except we don't want to, because if I read your mind, I kind of have to have mine open to you doing the same.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So you got to, that forces you to become pretty honest and pretty straight, and if you are open to everybody else's feelings and stuff, then you couldn't hurt somebody because you'd feel their pain.
Right.
And that's starting to happen. We are becoming much more sensitive and aware people, and so therefore having to become much more honest and open.
Of course, we live in a world of polarity here, and we still, we are becoming more sensitive and more caring on a certain percentage of the population, but boy, there's that other side of the population that's exactly the opposite of that, kind of an Ayn Rand kind of a philosophy of living. Yeah, and they tend to hold the levers of power, right,
and money.
Right.
Yeah.
So what do you think? I mean, obviously, I hear hope in what you say, and you're seeing the changes. And how do you think that's going to happen? I mean, how do we move out from under the levers of power that you're talking about?
Well, I think it would appear that there's a couple of things that are going to happen. One, you think of Russia. She defeated communism because people just stood in front of tanks and refused to take up arms and refused to fight. And the people that were driving the tanks refused to run over them. China probably could have done that as well in Tiananmen Square, but unfortunately they didn't quite stop their tanks. But so they're not quite there, perhaps. But the thing is, when people refuse to take up arms, we'll stop fighting. And you can see things are happening in the U.S. military. I mean, the rate of suicide is quite very high in the U.S. military.
Well, it's huge.
People are,
yeah.
Yeah. People don't want to be part of it. They don't believe in what they're doing, and thank goodness for that. So what's happening? People taking up protests in the middle of cities. People are starting to say, well, that's it. This is our world. Enough of dictating to us. We need to learn how to share and care for each other. So I think that's happening. But I also think it would appear that there's a bigger thing that happens to the Earth, and it seems to tie in with a cycle about every. If you think of our solar system and sort of the lens of our galaxy, if our galaxy is like a huge, giant frisbee in the form of a spiral,
right?
Our whole solar system sort of moves in and out the axis of that frisbee,
right,
or spiral, and it seems to cycle through that just a little under every 26,000 years. So when people talk about the age of Aquarius, it's about us going into, they divided this 26,000 years, or just slightly less than that, into 12 different ages. And it really is about where our polar axis is kind of aligned with. But so when it's pointing to the sort of star grouping called Aquarius, then that's the cycle we're actually moving into, and that's going to happen. That period of 2,000 years is really aligned to when we're in that lens of the frisbee, or in the lens of the galaxy. We're going to be most influenced by the energy that's emanating in that plane from the center of the galaxy, and that's being reflected in the energetic increases and the increased turmoil on the planets and earthquakes and weather changes and everything. Yes, mankind's contributed to that, but excuse me, I'm going to have to move my camera a little bit. We're getting some sunshine here.
Yeah, it looks
Anyway,
looks like you got some sunshine coming in from one of the windows
Yeah,
there
I'll
too.
go along a bit. Well, hopefully this won't distort the picture too much. You've probably seen enough space anyway.
No problem. One of the things that's interesting about what you're talking about is when you talk about Aquarius, Aquarians are water bearers, and their job was to go out in front of the caravan and find where the water was, and then lead people to the caravan to the water. And
okay, yeah.
so, that really aligns with what you're saying. Makes a great deal of sense.
Yeah, well, they say spiritual energy is very much related to water as a carrier for spiritual energy as well.
Right.
So whether it's a baptismal font or you find that a lot of spiritual communities are seaside communities. So
well, exactly, and that's the way it is here in Sarasota. We really sit in the middle of, I believe, a vortex, and we're next to water. I personally have always felt a deep pull to live somewhere close by water. I wouldn't be comfortable otherwise.
Yeah.
You're pretty close to water where you're at?
Oh yeah, we're just about we're about 50 meters from the water here. So, and we're up about.
I was going to say you must have a pretty good view too, then, huh?
Oh well, we're nestled. Yeah, from our upstairs balcony, we've got a nice view of the sea, and we're nestled in a little group of houses here. But of course, Tarrang is quite low lying, and we've got a major sort of geologic fault lines going through here, and we also have an active volcanic island just off the coast here. So there's a few people that worry about tsunamis a little bit.
Well, I suspect, huh?
Fortunately, we're about probably about 50 feet off the water where we are, but never mind. I firmly believe you're where you're meant to be, wherever you're meant to be.
Isn't that the way of it, for sure? So let's move. Let's talk about the other thing I found pretty interesting: the imminent possibility of fifth dimensional consciousness. How do you see that happening, and what does that mean to the regular guy? We live in a third dimensional world, and then there's actually four dimensions with time. Tell us, give us your idea of this. It's the way you phrase that. It's kind of as though we will actively participate and really know we're in a fifth dimensional consciousness.
Yeah, I mean, basically it's partly to do with this development of these additional strands of DNA, and also really with, and that's partly to do with, some say it's likely to be genetic influences that are being, DNA influences are being affected by the energies from the galaxy. David Wilcox goes into how they've been able to affect DNA changes,
right?
Just by taking light through an embryo. They could shine light through, I guess, a certain coherent laser light. They shine through an embryo of I think it was a frog, and then shone in a salamander, and actually turned the salamander embryo into a frog. So the influence of energy on our own internal genetic makeup has been demonstrated. So if you have this happening on a solar level, or right through our galaxy, then it's quite possible that you could have quite a quick genetic manipulation or development of the human genetic structure. And the other one is just people directing their attention and realizing that, I have people that come in and they don't know never even thought about past lives, but they, under a little bit of hypnosis, they start recalling all these past lives and their influences on them. So the fourth dimension is really about, as you say, time, and it's really about learning to master time, who we really are. If we think of ourselves as just a little personality that we're currently incarnating as, we're like the tip of the iceberg, and we're focused on that tip. If we can connect with the greater reality of who we are, then imagine if you could connect with all the skills and all the talents and abilities that you might have developed through 100 lifetimes. Suddenly, you would become, something much greater. And so I think it could be a lot of those things.
Have you noticed that you've been able to tap into that yourself?
Certainly is. The interesting thing is that to connect to the subconscious and superconscious, you have to really put this, you have to kind of quiet the conscious mind, which is a bit like if during the day, you look out there and the stars are up in the sky, but you can't see them,
Right.
And in earlier times, they would say that they just aren't there. But we know that the sun is so bright, we just can't see the stars. So you have to. Conscious mind is a bit like that sun. You got to somehow quieten that, dim it down, so that you can actually connect to the stars, which you see as your higher self or your higher consciousness. So that's quite easy under hypnosis because somebody else is actually giving you direction to quieten the conscious mind. But if you have to use your own conscious mind to quieten your conscious mind, it doesn't like to do it, one, unless it sees some benefit in it. And
well, what's in it for me is always the question, isn't it?
That's right, and as long as it's active, and you can't use the conscious mind to actually quieten yourself and take yourself into a state of hypnosis very easily. You can use tapes and pre-record your own voice and things like that.
Right.
But once you actually do develop that ability to quieten the mind, and which a lot of people, it's the same thing as meditation, really.
That's what I was going to suggest. Same thing can happen in meditation, deep meditation, right?
Yeah, and indeed, we should be. We know the health benefits of meditation.
Right.
And both at the physical, emotional, and mental and psychological levels. and of course, as we would look at it from the spiritual level and connection as well. So, why we don't introduce that, as a necessary part of school? When I teach people how to do self-hypnosis, they think, "Oh, that's so relaxing. Why haven't I been taught this?" Or why?
Well, I could
all my
answer.
life?
I could answer that question in one word: Christianity.
Yeah.
That was the block. I mean, when we first got meditation here, it came through TM, Transcendental Meditation. That didn't happen till what, the late 50s, early 60s? And if it hadn't been for the Beatles, I'm not sure how popularized it would have gotten by that time either.
No.
John Lennon said, had we discovered, met the Maharishi years before and discovered meditation, we'd have saved a lot of money, a lot of drug money.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that's true, But, this stuff all seems to happen pretty slowly. However, there's also this it really fits in with what you're talking about. There also comes this, just about everything you do, you work at it, you slog along, you work at it, and all of a sudden you hit a tipping point, and boom, it just kind of like everything changes, and you do this flip. You think that's what we can look forward to, something on that kind of a level where we just have this shift, this flip that everybody talks about, or so many people talk about?
Certainly from what Armistice talks about is that there's a lot of people that aren't quite ready for that. And, while we can have something that happens to us up doors, it can be pretty frightening for people if they don't, if they're not prepared for it.
Right.
So I think, how much disruption we need to have to our existing society before we actually change our directions. I think that's an open question. And so I don't know. I don't think there are any real answers to how easy this is going to be, or how it's. And in fact, even Armistice says this is something new. We don't know, because your planet is actually raising its consciousness, its awareness. So, and we either go with it, or we get left behind.
Right.
And what he talks about is actually having two levels of reality, where there will be one group that goes and stays with the current world consciousness, and another sort of splits off into a different level of vibrational awareness and frequency.
That's an interesting thought.
And it's just like people that connect to the astral level. It's a different. In the astral level, people create their own reality to a large extent.
When you get into that finer etheric levels, things are materialized much easier. We're in a far denser, and it takes more, I think, to make changes and to create than it does in. And I really think that part of why we're here is to learn how to work within the frame of that, because once you get into that finer etheric, and you can create immediately. Boy, you take a few million of us and catapult us into that area, we could create some serious havoc. Without knowing what we're doing with it, wishing for this and that and not. I mean, I see it in people's lives right here on a daily basis. They get involved with drugs, looking for really that spiritual high, some way to get away from themselves, and just their life turns into disaster just here in this level. And you take those same kind of personalities and put them in a real fine ether where things create even more rapidly. My goodness, we'd be in some serious trouble.
Yeah, although it's an interesting thing, it would appear that you can create your own reality to some extent, but it is your reality and not necessarily others.
That's for sure.
So here, where we're all in the one manifestation.
Well, tell you what, I want to we're running down to, we got a couple of minutes left. This time has gone pretty quickly here. As I knew it would, we had a ton of material I'd like to have gone and talked with you about. We weren't able to. I want to thank Tom Johnson tonight. He's done a spectacular job over here trying to keep all this together. He's had nothing but technical problems, and we've been able to keep this thing all plugged in and working and going along pretty smoothly. So it's been, and you've been a great guest. It's been a real pleasure. Tell us your website and a place where people can find your books.
Okay. Yeah. Thanks. Well, George, the website is www.empower, empower-u.net. So it's empower-u.net. And my books can be found on Amazon. So you can either look under my name, so Terry Keillor, so Terry Keillor, or there's links from my website as well under the products area, or you can just go under Amazon or Google and just Google my name or Conversations with Armistice or Apocalypse or Eden. Any one of those will find me.
Great. Well, listen, if you happen to get back in this direction, you get near sunny Sarasota, or I get down to New Zealand, we'll have to have a cup of coffee.
We will do. I look forward to it.
Listen, you've been a pleasure. I appreciate your taking your time to be on the show, and we'll look forward to talking to you sometime in the future, Terry.
Okay, thanks, George.
Have a good night now. Well, Terry's an interesting guy, clear on the other side of the world from here, and boy, it just really thrills me to be able to connect with like-minded people all the way around the globe, and it's amazing stuff, and going to become even more amazing. Come back next week. I have another great guest, and in the meantime, don't forget to accentuate the positive and have a fantastic week.